As the most important family home in the United States, the White House has been a symbol of the nation since 1800. Built to be the residence of America's presidents and their families, this iconic structure has been host to our nation's leaders' private and public lives. While it has come to represent both continuity and stability to the American people, the actual residence has been in a state of constant change over the past 2 centuries. Since the time that John Adams and his family moved into the home, first families have changed and redecorated the interior according to their taste and prevailing styles of the time. However, no historic preservation existed to inform the nation of past leaders and their time in office. Jacqueline Kennedy sought to change this during her time as First Lady by taking a stand in restoring the White House and thus began a movement of historic and artistic preservation. The Kennedys' arrival to the White House in 1961 ushered in a completely new approach to enhancing the integrity of the White House and its holdings. Mrs. Kennedy surveyed the house and found it to only contain a limited representation of the rich history associated with it. Much like her first experience as an 11-year-old girl touring the White House in 1941, she was dismayed to see so few historical furnishings and even commented that the mansion was rather bleak and that there was nothing in the way of a booklet to take away, nothing to teach one more about the great house and the presidents who had lived there. With this, she made it her responsibility to take a stand and embark on the extensive program of bringing America's history to life in the White House. Initially, President Kennedy was among the skeptics that very much opposed Jackie's plans and told her that he couldn't allow her to take on a high-profile redecoration that would surely bring about unwanted attention. Perhaps he was thinking about past presidents, including Martin Van Buren and Harry Truman, who had sought to make changes in the White House and in the process were highly criticized by Congress as well as the public. Yet Jackie was just as adamant and took a stand to emphasize to her husband that it wasn't a redecoration, but a restoration. After seeing that Jackie would not be dissuaded, President Kennedy asked his personal attorney to intervene. He suggested forming the Arts Committee for the White House to provide legal and political cover. Its purpose would be to raise funds and solicit donations of historically correct furnishings, thereby deflecting any potential criticism that taxpayer money was being used frivolously. Jackie's vision was so compelling that others were eager to join her in making it a reality. The Fine Arts Committee quickly came together, barely a month after President Kennedy's inauguration in 1961. Before this time, historic preservation in America followed 2 different paths. One focused on important historical figures, events, and associated landmarks, while the other focused on preserving natural features and establishing national parks. These 2 paths merged together with the establishment of the National Trust for Historic Preservation in 1949. The trust gave great focus to the acquisition of historic properties, and like Mrs. Kennedy's project, intended to provide a window into the nation's past through preservation. During the 1950s and early 60s, popular sentiment was that little that was old was good. As a result, few were concerned with the protection of the nation's heritage. Jackie, however, did not share this ideal and took a stand for national protection that ultimately sparked a revival in public interest of historic preservation. In her mission to restore the White House, Jacqueline Kennedy scoured government warehouses in search of displaced White House furnishings and solicited the nation to donate important historical and artistic items. As part of this relentless effort, she successfully pressed Senator Clint Anderson in the 87th Congress to pass what became Public Law 87286 that would make such donated items the inalienable property of the White House. This ensured that all artifacts belonging to the White House would be cataloged and stored either at the White House or Smithsonian Institution. Throughout her involvement with the White House restoration, she personally examined more than 25,000 artifacts both donated and located in the mansion's storage space before she decided what belonged or didn't. Jacqueline's restoration of the White House scaled quickly, and on November 3, 1961, she established the White House Historical Association to raise funds through the sale of her newly published book, The White House: An Historic Guide. This association would financially aid her project, given that all funding was strictly private. She also successfully pressed for the creation of the federal position of White House Curator to permanently continue the effort of protecting the historical integrity of the mansion.
The thing that she was most concerned about was she was worried that when she was no longer First Lady, the next First Lady might not be so interested in history and might have a sister-in-law who ran a curio shop somewhere who decided that they would redecorate perhaps in the style of the late 1940s or something that was more contemporary. So she thought that if there was a White House Historical Association, that would be one bulwark that would prevent future first ladies from, turning it backwards, back to before the period in which it had become such a great museum.
Ultimately, Jacqueline wanted to show the public her efforts with the restoration, and on the night of February 14, 1962, more than 50 million viewers tuned into their television sets to watch a tour of the White House with Mrs. John F. Kennedy.
This little chest was left by President Van Buren to his grandson. This piano was designed by Franklin Roosevelt with the eagle supports. And this is the end of the room where Pablo Casals played for us, where we had a portable stage built when we had the Shakespeare players. I just think that everything in the White House should be the best, the entertainment that's given here. And if it's an American company that you can help, I like to do that. If it's not, just as long as it's the best.
According to the Museum of Broadcast Communications, this primetime television documentary was the first in which a woman narrated large segments of the text, reflecting the emerging role of women in American society. This ultimately earned Mrs. Kennedy an honorary Emmy from the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. This, however, was just the beginning. Mrs. Kennedy's interest in the historic integrity of the White House inevitably led to a greater contribution in the field of historic preservation as a whole. She personally intervened in the planned demolition of Lafayette Square across the street from the White House, and helped to negotiate not only the restoration of old buildings there, but a reasonable construction of new buildings with modern use. Jackie was successful in restoring the White House and bringing a new light to arts and culture in America because she had the confidence to respond decisively to her vision and the determination to overcome any major obstacles that arose. Beyond her iron will, superb organizational skills, and highly persuasive manner, she ultimately achieved her goal because she had chosen a project in which she completely believed. Almost 2 years after the completion of the White House restoration, Jacqueline faced the unimaginable loss of her husband with his assassination on November 22, 1963. Despite this tragedy, she continued to take a stand for the arts and humanities by successfully establishing the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, the Kennedy Space Center, and the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library to honor her husband's legacy. Later in life, Jacqueline became a resident of New York City and attempted to live very quietly, making few public appearances. In 1975, she stepped back into the public eye to assist in the campaign to save New York's Grand Central Station, one of the city's most well-known landmarks. She had been strongly affected by the demolition of Penn Station years earlier and felt that its loss was a devastating blow to the fairly new preservation movement in the United States. By 1978, the argument had made its way to the Supreme Court, and on the eve of the case, she led a demonstration that wound through the streets of New York and declared,
I think if we don't care about our past, we can't have very much hope for our future. And we've all heard that it's too late, or that it has to happen, or that it's inevitable. But I don't think that's true, because I think if there is a great effort, even if it's at the 11th hour, you can succeed. And I think, and I know that that's what we'll do. Thank you.
2 months later, the decision was made and Grand Central Station was saved. It was said that when Jackie joined the cause to save a building in Manhattan, the bulldozers might as well turn around and go home. Mrs. Kennedy's participation in the fight to save the landmark was a representation of her place in the preservation movement that was sweeping the country at the time. Jackie taught us to truly believe in our dreams, no matter how much others might try to discourage us. What she envisioned for the White House was clearly not what others could see or even wanted to see. It was a struggle to win over the hearts and minds of those around her, including her husband, but she took a stand until she prevailed. She will forever be remembered as the First Lady who valued the nation's history and taught us to preserve that past for our future.